Welcome, everyone. Almost the last session of the day. Thank you so much for attending. I know everybody's eager to either go to lunch or go home. If you're here because you want to hear about securing private wireless from design to deployment. You're very likely already introducing these industrial-grade, carrier-grade networks into your enterprise network, and you want to make sure that you can do so safely and at the speed of your business. So I'm Rick Lievano. I'm the CTO for the telco, media, and gaming industry at Microsoft. And joining me is Krishnan Jagannathan. Did I kill that?
Yeah, it's Jagannathan.
Krishnan is our telco expert. Many years really securing telco networks. I had the privilege of working with Krishnan 20 years ago or so in the Microsoft telco practice. And so it's been a nice little reunion here in the last few minutes.
Absolutely.
So let's. My job here is to instill fear in you, right? As you bring these networks in, you want to make sure that you are well equipped to handle a new and emerging threats that this more ample space is going to provide. Now, generative AI, agentic AI, certainly a huge impact across all parts of our business. Not surprisingly, the early adopters of these great new technologies are the bad guys, right? The bad actors, the hackers. Take a look at just phishing as an example, which of course, very prevalent. If you've received a phishing email in the last, couple of years, boy, you'll notice that the quality of those phishing emails has significantly increased, right? There's no typos, there's good grammar, very polished, very professional, very much more difficult to distinguish the phishing attack and email today than it was a couple of years ago. Thank you, ChatGPT. Now, when an attack happens, it's more than likely going to spread across your internal exposure, right? You need to ensure that, so for example, misconfigurations can really drive that attack and let it spread like wildfire. Flat networks that are not very well configured, legacy systems that you have in place. Now, add private wireless, right? Private wireless is going to increase the number of devices you have there. You may you have connected cameras across your factory floor. You may have robots. You may have a plethora of devices, and now you want to ensure that, again, they're not contributing to the problem. They're not really expanding that attack surface and enabling these attacks to go from a foothold into a major outage. And in that sense, the traditional SOC teams, the processes that you have in place, the processes that have been very helpful and in fact critical to the successful securing of your networks are really not enough for a lot of these newer technologies, right? We know that within minutes of an attack, that attack has already moved into another part of your network, right? So it's transversed laterally to another part of the network. And then it becomes a game of whack-a-mole, right? You discover an attack, you now block it here. That attack with compromised credentials and compromised security and configurations already moved to another part of your network. And so it's a huge challenge. And maybe the last scary point that I'll make is a lot of times we just don't even know we've been compromised, right? It takes nearly a year to discover and to fully address an attack, right? So private wireless, again, it's a great opportunity, certainly to improve the quality of networks, but are you well equipped to deal with cellular technology, essentially something that's a little different than enterprise Wi-Fi across your network? Right? We don't want to just provide tooling. We want to provide you with the ability to more quickly address these issues, right? To reduce the impact, the blast radius if an attack does happen, right? And for that, Krishna and Nokia have been working with Microsoft for a couple of years now, creating solutions that specifically target this space. How can you bring private wireless, private 5G into your enterprise networks, but do so safely? And so with that, I'm going to pass it to the real expert here.
Thanks.
Who's going to cover the solution in depth. Thank you, Krishnan.
Pretending to be the expert. A very good morning to all of you. And for the time that you made before the end of the session, the end of the Ignite event. Really appreciate. Could I have a show of hands? How many of you are from utilities, enterprise, networks, and all right, so we have a pretty good mix. Railways, airports, perfect. Well, that's essentially what we are talking about here. Largely speaking, what Rick spoke about was applicable to incident threats on a mixed network model, not unlike most telcos, where you have multiple generations of networks in place, although people are moving to 5G. And then, of course, multiple suppliers, and then you have the supply chain issues. Additionally, telco as well as private wireless is broken up into domains. So there is a core domain at the back. In addition, you have the OT backend. You have the front end of the shop floor. And then, of course, connecting the two is basically transport and the radio access network. So essentially, it's a very broad vista and a big, exposure to incident attacks. Essentially, that's where we are going. On top of which, if we have issues such as AI, phishing, credential theft, and backend systems which are legacy, which potentially have connectivity into the internet for various reasons. Number one reason potentially is misconfiguration, and then the O&AM access, the management access to that bunch of devices or endpoints, be it the core or the RAN, or essentially the endpoint itself. So it's a plethora of entry points that we are talking about here, and that's basically where we need to have a dome, which is fed with telemetry from the network, which is basically, with very few false negatives, false positives, and so forth. So something that's accurate, helps analysts essentially triage faster, and then analyze, and is assisted by AI, for threat hunting and things like that, which we will talk about. That's basically going to be the what we're going to talk about over here, and hopefully you find it relevant. As far as the networks that we're talking about here, there is, in addition to what the White House puts out as executive orders or its equivalents in other countries, you have sectoral compliances, which basically add additional pressure in terms of securing networks. The challenge here is the balance between operational efficiency, which is what the lights-on chaps essentially worry about, the guys who manage these networks, against which is security, which is more focused on the securing the endpoint compliance and issues such as those. A good example could be all links between, let's say, within the core or from the RAN to the core and so forth need to be protected, need to be basically encrypted and so forth, for which you need a root of trust, which is a certificate. And the certificate needs to be rotated. Once you do that, you go through a ceremony, the network comes down, and the operations guys don't like it. So this is basically the sort of a conflict that always exists between operations and security, which is something that one needs to consider. Central to the whole thing is the fact that you have a widely distributed architecture. So it's not something that you can actually physically protect. You'll need to put in place the necessary systems that pick up the breadcrumbs so that you can correlate those towards, indicators of compromise, and then basically contain and mitigate them. One huge entry point is basically credential theft. And to make the barrier difficult, you actually add more complexity to it, which is basically authentication complexity, which is additional what should I say, confirmation of your identity through MFA. The whole integration of MFA into the whole picture is an important thing. And this came to light during the Ukrainian power attack that was basically done by the Russians, which was a pretty sophisticated attack, 2015, 2017, and then continued. So it's a multi-layered attack. There's a BBC sort of video on that. Maybe you can look it up. So essentially, that lacked, defense in depth as well as complexity for, against authentication. So people had shared credentials as well as the fact that, you could just get in there once you had access to the network as such. Bring down the PDCs, switch off the circuit breakers so that they don't reclose, and bring down the entire network. It's an interesting, situation. It's those sort of networks that we basically provide connectivity to, and which is basically where we are situating the this discussion. The endpoints, be they, they could be AMI, they could be distribution automation in a distribution network, or it could be systems in a network that control essentially on-ground activity and so forth. All those endpoints need to be monitored. They need to be monitored from a operating system standpoint, from a hardware management standpoint, and from an app standpoint, which is basically what an EDR tries to do. And quite often the issue there is that EDRs are chatty. They talk quite a bit. So essentially you have an issue of snowballing of alerts. So essentially it's important for us to have EDRs that are optimized and built, purpose designed for telecom networks. AI-powered threat analytics essentially is very helpful in cutting that cycle of triage when the incident, cyber incident, comes into the security operations center. So you have a mix of analysts sitting there, some of whom are experienced, some of whom are not. There's a lot of attrition that happens in the security operations center. And of course, there's a lack of prioritization of alerts. In that scenario, it would be good to have something that's trained to be CISO level or SOC manager level or IR level capable, LLM that basically advises and provides support, cognitive support to an analyst on the ground. Also, it's important from the standpoint of relevance and, I would say relevance from an age standpoint. You could have the very latest inputs, insights, providing help to the analyst to make the right decision. The last thing is stochastic decision making. So you're given 4 or 5 potential outcomes towards which you take mitigation action, and which of them basically lead to what, and which of them is the best is basically what AI can actually give you. This platform that I am talking about, which is built on Azure underpinnings, essentially. It's a superstructure built on Azure, which receives alerts from the network, will basically be aided by AI, and that's where it actually is very relevant to the telco situation, as well as to the private wireless network scenario. I thought I should include something that's sort of complex here to get us closer to the relevance of the situation here. What you see over here is that cybersecurity dome from Nokia that basically provides the, which is sort of a telco SOAR SIM. And the SIM essentially receives inputs, correlates, generates offenses and alerts, which then, some of those alerts, which are complex alerts, are treated as incidents and forwarded to the cybersecurity dome. Cybersecurity dome is a place where these are further triaged, analyzed, and an incident response procedure is applied on them after categorizing them as a core threat or a RAN threat or a transport threat or whatever it is, or maybe it's a telco cloud threat, and appropriate containment and mitigation actions are taken. What else do you see over here? You basically see the industrial edge, which is basically a shop floor. You have the back end of your industrial systems, which is connected to the other end. There is a connection to the internet as well, which needs to be protected. And of course, you have O&M, which is basically the administration as well as operations network that basically manages. That's the sort of portal to manage these elements which are sitting in the core. The core essentially has information about the call that is coming in and processing the call, essentially. It could be a data call, it could be a voice call, whatever it might be. It could be a group communication scenario in the industry space. It could be signaling. If it's railway, it could be other kind of scenarios there. So connecting the core and the RAN is basically your transport. So which is basically either optical or switched IP. All these give out security offenses, alerts, which then need to be correlated and then fed into Cyberdome, and then mapped to either a core playbook or a use case or a RAN use case, and of which you could possibly have 9 or 10 or 15 of them. Today, we have a bunch of building blocks that can actually help to build playbooks, maybe about 40 or 50 playbooks for each of these domains and areas. You have any questions? Do let me know. Let's make this interactive. This sort of gives you an idea. In addition to Cybersecurity Dome, we have 3 pieces of telemetry in the telco network, three platforms. One is for privileged access management, and privileged identities actually are a huge part of the whole sea of identities that's managed. I was reading your report, Rick, yesterday, and I was surprised to see, basically the proportion of privileged identities and privileged, RBAC scenarios, authorization scenarios they're given, of which only about 2% actually use those authorizations as well as the full role privilege that's given. So essentially, you have many attack pathways into your network, just through either internal attacks or credential theft. And to control that, you need to have in place, the identity access manager, which is one of those critical pieces. So in addition to that, it also takes care of things like forensic, logs, video logs, which is very important. I mean, countries all over the world essentially want operators and what they did on the platform to be recorded. And then, of course, there's also the aspect of session control. Somebody authenticates himself, comes inside, you should have the power to throw him out. And quite often, this is the conversation we have with telecom providers, and pretty involved conversation. Because that's basically the identity access manager. You have the endpoint detection and response. This, in contrast to a CrowdStrike or the ITEDRs, essentially is restricted, can play in the user space only and detect what's happening on the OS, config drift, hardening drift, and so forth, which are indicators of something funny that's going on. The third aspect is the root of trust. So all the links between interfaces on each of the components that I showed you in the picture earlier, all those need to be, all those components, first of all, need to authenticate themselves using MTLS or something like that. And then the link needs to be protected for link integrity with IPsec or something else. All that requires certificates, and the certificates need to be issued by the organization that's operating the network. Otherwise, it's basically self-signed, or certificates who have life of 50 years or something like that. These are classic scenarios where you could tamper with these kind of things, tools, and essentially subvert the network. These 3 systems or their equivalents could be integrated with Cybersecurity Dome, pass the alerts on. Cybersecurity Dome by itself resides on Azure. There is an agent on premise, which basically feeds processed alerts to the Cybersecurity Dome, over which you can then define your playbooks, build new playbooks, and get the incident response desk to manage the alerts and incidents that take place. And this is actually built for telco. So it has playbooks and building blocks towards telco, the telco threat model. I'd like to actually play this, but let me tell you the story here. This is basically the Gen AI assistant that helps the incident response analyst who's basically working on Cybersecurity Dome to actually get them contextual information. For example, the scenario here is there's a radio access network which is basically virtualized radio access net, not traditional RAN. So it's got a radio head, a central unit, and it has a distribution unit. The front haul is between the radio head and the distribution unit, and the back haul is from the central unit down to the national data center. Typical, that's how it is. There may be about 20 or 30 regional DUs, and there could perhaps be about 7 or 8 CUs, and then you could have 3 national data centers. Typically, the large tier 1 telcos, that's how they are broken up. In this scenario on the right, what you see is where one of the CUs is behaving in a funny manner. And when the CU behaves in a funny manner, the radio network around that CU, the towers, and the user endpoints are all basically vulnerable. And this CU shows up on the digital twin screen of Cyberdome in red or something like that. So it's risk weighted. Essentially, why? Because there was a rat Trojan that was discovered on it. And that correlates to somebody, Nicholas, who's basically the administrator, who's accessed this in an anomalous way. He doesn't come in on Sundays. He comes in on Sundays, in this case, because his credentials have been stolen. If I let this play, that basically is what it'll show, and we've got to be patient about it. I don't know how to hit this button here. Maybe I can do it from here. I'll just let it roll. And while the analyst, looks at this case, essentially is assisted with a bunch of prompts, alerts, information, contextual information, based on an LLM that we have actually trained for telco security, on top of the AI that's provided by Azure, and of course other underpinnings from the platform. And what this would lead to is a situation where Nicholas's identity needs to be contained. He needs to be investigated, which is what the playbook will do. And then, of course, you'll suspend the account. You'll also sort of take that CU off and bring another CU in and to work in its place so that there's no downtime, which can easily be done. That's an HA geo-resilience aspect. So over here, what you see in this little screen, which you actually don't see, is a bunch of RPM commands. So somebody comes in with Nicholas's credentials, installs the Krasui rat on that CU. And then, of course, many interesting things can happen from then on. What's important is the fact that you've actually discovered that there is an element in that huge network that's basically at risk, and you are actually attending to it, cutting down dwell time, and then mitigating the situation. Yeah. So essentially what you're achieving with a platform like this is security observability. And what everybody is focused about in a lights-on network is network observability. Well, this is the difference here. So the NF telemetry shows you what is wrong and where, which is basically those elements that you see on that little screen there. Those that are tending towards warmer colors are risky, whereas those that are green and blue are, just performing normally. And then you have a security twin of the network, which is a huge achievement. Let's just take a network like any of the tier ones. It's a huge thing to be able to see every telecom circle and all those elements in that RAN network, plus elements in the core across the entire network. It also talks to the transport network and tells you which of the links essentially are, cryptographically weak. So from a PQC standpoint, lets you know there's a splice that's happened. Someone's basically tapping on a link or something like that, it comes up as an alert. So a whole bunch of threat scoring happens to let you know what's more risky, something like UEBA, which you are familiar with. And then, of course, this AI assistant, which adds a tremendous amount of value. This could turn into agentic AI. Right now, it's basically Gen AI. And we have released a hunt assistant, which is basically, it puts to play the CIA diamond hunting model in place, which is basically an asset, who is after the asset, what's the threat intelligence for that specific asset, how it can be attacked, and what could be some tactical responses that you could have in place. So that's basically a logical quadrilateral that drives threat hunting. Otherwise, it's overused term, as you all know. But here, what we're trying to do is use AI to actually put that threat hunting model in place. So essentially, make a postulate about 4 or 5 threats based on the kind of components that you have, which are targets. Use essentially telco threat intelligence. Could be basically, could be networks whose addresses are exposed. So GTs that are exposed, and that basically what could happen around those. So it's a combination of those things. And this is growing, and as it's used, it's going to get more rich in the domain, both in the private wireless network domain as well as in the telco domain. Let's move on. How are we doing for time? 15 minutes, fine. I just wanted to show you a flying demo or a video of the platform. Do take a look at it.
Are you looking for a fast and flexible 5G security orchestration solution? NetGuard Cybersecurity Dome is a suite of security products that provides an integrated extended detection and response, or XDR, that unifies control points, offers security telemetry, and provides analytics and operations in one system. Our security solution utilizes both on-premises and cloud components, allowing for faster speed and more flexibility when deploying security components. NetGuard Cybersecurity Dome and Microsoft Azure integrate seamlessly to rapidly deploy security detection and response. Our solution offers a topology view, allowing you to see abnormal traffic and anomalies and identify threats in real time. Our 5G specific use cases provide you with the ability to see a wide range of security scenarios. Our threat scoring feature measures the probability that elements in your system are under attack, and superior behavior analytics allow you to quickly identify malicious users and services. Faster response time, superior threat detection, and unmatched analytics. NetGuard Cybersecurity Dome provides you with the integrated security solution your network needs.
So Nokia has been, securing telco networks for about a good 25 years or so. You won't see us in the IT domain security space. So quite often, it wouldn't be the Gartners of the world, but we are in a category of our own, which is telco security, which has more to do with geo-resilience, the vast scale of the telco network for us to be able to manage all that, and also things like the very complex role-based access control that we need to have in place. The telco network is a scenario, and that applies to even private wireless, where you have a whole bunch of personas from different groups that are actually sitting on top of this network and touching those systems with privileged access, which is quite a dangerous scenario. And that's at the root of the whole problem. The other issue is to cut the opacity. That's the whole idea here with SOAR, and more so here with telco SOAR. We would have perhaps generally about 60 large telco references across the world for most of those systems that I spoke to you about, the certificate management, the PKI system, the PAM, and then of course, the EDR, which is one of our newer products that works closely with the SOAR, which is basically the cyber dome, to give you, insights from the edge of the network, essentially. And in your case, that edge becomes even more complex and complicated with industrial edge scenarios like IoT and so forth, where you have a lot of systems connecting into the network, creating signaling storms, essentially because there are default passwords all over the place. The point here is to detect those, and it's not simple compliance and enforcing compliance that will help here. You need to detect, point it out, and then basically remediate those those default credentials across that network. There is the second issue with private wireless, which has to do with legacy. So there's a lot of legacy components in there, a lot of legacy platforms in there, which need to be replaced, which need to be upgraded, all of which basically talks to maintenance windows, downtime, and so forth. That's essentially where we are with this. The whole idea here is to try to see whether we can help things with greater observability and protecting the entire network across all domains. And with a platform like this, that basically is like a dome over the entire operation, one can speed up the accuracy with the AI. That's a place where it helps a great deal. And also, the mean time to remediate comes down. And if you are actually, if even the newbie analyst or the incident response manager is actually advised with the rightly tuned stochastic advice, things get even better. And that MTTR, which is one of the most important KPIs of any security operations center, can actually positively be helped. Overall, it also helps you in picking up those alerts which are important to be addressed right away. So the prioritization of alerts, this is a big thing in large networks. That's vulnerabilities that are thrown up by the telemetry. Which of those are critical? Those systems that are exposed on gateway networks or LANs, which are vulnerable, need to be fixed first, rather than those that are deep down inside the network. Of course, they're open to insider threat scenarios. So the prioritization is an important part. That's something that can be done over this as well, so that you cut down dwell time and then close out essentially the time that the attacker is on your network, one way or the other, cutting down the APT cycles greatly. We have been recognized across the across the industry. This is Frost & Sullivan's recognition of Cybersecurity Dome, and we feature the platform at Mobile World Congress, typically at the telco events, and there is a great deal of interest here, largely because telco is a space where the security is a split brain scenario. So there is the IT domain, and there is basically the corporate domain in a telco that has a security operations center in there, along with the CISO, who is more focused on the telco, on the corporate domain. The other part of the telco is your network, more or less, the dark side. People don't know much about it. There's a NOC manager who knows all about it. There are basically IMS leads, core leads, who basically own their parts of the network, who know all about it. So essentially, the CISO doesn't get much of a traction in the network on the network side, and the challenge, is that CISO and the SOC platform, or the network intelligence platform, sits generally in the on the IT domain side, whereas you have a NOC here that needs to be connected to the SOC. Essentially, that's where the whole ball game is. With SOC maturity reaching a level 4, level 5, and so forth, more of the business lines will start writing the playbooks. and those logs will be fed into the security operations center. And that's basically what we're trying to help over here, so that we have either two SOCs, an OT SOC and an IT SOC, or a combined SOC, essentially because the CISO is responsible for risk management across the two domains. So that's just to give you an idea of what's happening in the telco space, and that gets a little bit more complicated in the Industry 4.0, 5.0, 6.0 scenario, as you may well know. Would there be any questions for Rick and me from the audience? I hope you found this useful. And I have to let you know that I'm pretending to be a veteran. Essentially, this is my wife's Air Force cadet hat, which I steal for events such as these, just as an aside. Thank you so much for your time.